Welcome to the third series of Force 13's Hurricane Week, where over the next 6 days we'll be running special features and taking a look back through the year 2015 as it happened in the tropics. So far this year we've had 82 tropical storms worldwide, of which 48 reached hurricane intensity and 35 reached major hurricane status. Of course, 9 of those went on to become Category 5s as well. Of those, 39 made landfall, or there were 39 separate landfalls, the most of which occurring in the Philippines and Australia, where a total of 5 storms made landfall there in both countries. The strongest storm worldwide this year was Hurricane Patricia, of course. It reached a remarkable 200-mile-an-hour wind speed and a pressure of 879 millibars, one of the strongest storms ever, and definitely the strongest in the Western Hemisphere. But before we begin properly, let us spare a thought for those who did lose possessions, property, or even people they held dear throughout the year, because as we know, these storms may be beautiful and fascinating, but they can also be devastating and deadly. This year we're covering the top 100 Category 5 storms from around the world over the next 6 days, plus we will have lots of extra features including 2015 storm summaries, a game show series and lots of other interesting and funny videos throughout the week. Starting with myself cracking up by the looks of things. So without further ado, let us get on with things. The top 100 today, starting out with number 100 to 81. Here it is. Hurricane Joan started out just like any other East Pacific storm in August 1994, but as time went on, things got a little strange.
Hurricane, or Typhoon Joan, of 1994 was a Pacific tropical cyclone across all 3 Pacific basins and churned across the Pacific for a whole month. Joan formed during the extremely active 1994 Pacific hurricane season, and during its extremely long 31-day duration, 29 of those days tropical, Joan took a whole 7,165 miles, or 13,280 kilometers, the longest of any tropical cyclone since records began. Despite its long track, Joan barely affected any land at all, only doing minimal damage as it passed by Johnston Atoll in Alaska as a post-tropical remnant. Joan's long existence and track through the Pacific, going through all 3 basins, the Eastern Pacific Basin, the Central Pacific Basin, and the Western Pacific Basin, makes it number 100 on the top 100 Category 5 tropical cyclones list.
With a peak wind speed of 175 miles per hour, but a pressure only of 929 millibars, though admittedly it could have been lower, it's still only the 87th most intense storm ever. No landfalls, no landfall intensity of course, $15 million in damages makes it 83rd place, adjusted for inflation that's $24 million in today's money. If Hurricane Joan had tracked further north in the Central Pacific, it could have been a major storm for Hawaii, rather than the longest living storm ever. And with its erratic track entering the West Pacific and back into the Central Pacific, it really confused the NHC as well. Now for number 99, and that was Super Typhoon Joan, though it formed in November. In 1975, the lowest recorded pressure anywhere in the world was 877 millibars, set 2 years earlier, but Joan was going to set that record a little bit lower, reaching Category 5 intensity out in the open Pacific Ocean, and then moved towards the north, affecting some of the Japanese islands, and then skirting off towards the northeast. Joan was very strong indeed, reaching a peak intensity of 875 millibars, which beat Nora, but of course would be surpassed later on by another storm. No landfall, but June did cause some monetary damage, albeit only $300,000 at the time, the 96th highest of our top 100. 1.33 million adjusted for inflation, however, that would be 91st. 3,200 evacuees as well, mainly in Japan. But whichever way you look at it, June was a very strong storm. Right at the end of 2002, Tropical Storm Zoey formed in the South Pacific and became a Category 5 storm out in the open ocean before heading towards the south, towards Vanuatu, though it didn't strike those islands, and then turned a little bit further towards Fiji, but also didn't affect there so much either. But Zoey was the strongest storm ever in the South Pacific by intensity, with an air pressure, get this, of 890 millibars. And a wind speed of 180 miles per hour at its peak. That's why we've put it at number 98 on the top 100. $0.5 million of damages still, that's 92nd, no fatalities, and around 600 buildings were damaged in the vicinity of the storm as it trekked towards the south. Very strong storm Zoey was, and here it is. Well, at number 97, it's a storm from earlier that same year in 2002, again in the southern hemisphere. It's Cyclone Harry, which formed in March and became a Category 5 on approach to Madagascar, where it just about made landfall there on the very eastern coast and then moved towards the south, passing Réunion to the west and then moving off towards the southeast and doing what many storms do, turn post-tropical. Harry was a rather strong storm indeed. It had 160 mph winds. It was one of few storms that made landfall at that intensity but didn't actually do very much on land because it hit a sparsely populated area. An air pressure of 905, one of the strongest in the basin. Unknown damages, only the one landfall of course, 4 fatalities in the end, but only 3 buildings were reported damaged, but of course it could have been more. There's some pictures of Harry to the bottom right of your screen, and here it is in its entirety. In at number 96 is Super Typhoon Amy, which became a Category 5 storm in 1962, the end of August of that year actually, becoming a Category 5 in the Philippine Sea and then approaching the Philippines, moving towards the south, but it didn't reach the Philippines, not quite. It went to Taiwan instead and made landfall there as a Category 3 before moving towards China, where it made landfall as a Category 1 typhoon before moving on to the Korean Peninsula as a tropical storm. Amy reached a pressure rather low actually of 935 millibars, but not as low as many other Category 5 storms indeed. 160 miles per hour, a fairly, I suppose, on the weekend of Category 5 intensity, I suppose. The typhoon made 3 landfalls in the end, its strongest one with 115 mile-an-hour winds over Taiwan. $1 million of damages adjusted for inflation, that's $8 million today, and 24 fatalities. Building damages are unknown. Now we go way back to 1952 and Super Typhoon Wilma. Remarkably not the one that formed in the Atlantic in 2005, but still a Category 5 storm that formed in the Western Pacific, and predictably, at the end of October, it was headed straight for the Philippines, and indeed it made landfall near Category 5 intensity on the island of Samar before passing through the rest of Visayas and then moving on towards Vietnam, maintaining Category 3 intensity for some time before landfall weakened just before landfall to a Cat 1. So, how strong exactly was it? Well, it not only got to Category 5, but it did reach winds of 185 miles an hour and a central pressure of 914 millibars. Rather low, but not as low as many other storms around that area. 4 landfalls, the strongest one being 150 miles an hour, that was the first one. And apart from that, we really don't know much else about Wilma, apart from the fact that it did cause 10 fatalities, mainly in the Philippines. No pictures of the storm either, because apparently cameras hadn't been invented yet. As you can see, this is Cyclone Orson, and I'm so confident in my team that I'm going to let the team talk about this storm. Well, a very strong cyclone which made landfall in Australia, was a Category 5 at one point in its life, and here we've got the whole team, but in particular our Australian experts, Jason and David. What do you think about this storm?
Well, it's quite a strong storm, 905 hectopascals.
Hectopascals, that's a new one.
It was the same thing as millibars.
Yes,
yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah.
So it reached Category 5 intensity in the latter weeks of April 1989, made a course directly south for Western Australia, and I suppose that was, it's a sparsely populated part of Australia there, isn't it?
Yeah, it made landfall in a sparsely populated area, and resultant damage was relatively minor.
16.8 million, one of the lowest we've got here for landfalling storms, especially if its intensity. Was major hurricane strength at landfall?
Ooh,
yeah, I believe it was.
I'm not. Yeah. Well, however, the only lives lost were about 4 Indonesian fishermen in the vicinity of Ashmore Island. It's just off the coast of WA. So yeah.
4 of the 5 fatalities that came from Orson were actually not on land. $17 million of damages was still significant, especially for the Western Australian coast. Look at these images, for instance, and you wouldn't really want that approaching your house. Look at it on radar, the set of the storm clearly visible from the coast of Western Australia. It was a very strong storm whilst it was out at sea, no doubt about that one, 160 miles an hour, but a pressure 904 millibars, very strong indeed. Just the one landfall, of course, 145 miles an hour that landfall was at, damaged $17 million, adjusted for inflation today, that's 32 million, 5 fatalities as we said, and 320 buildings were damaged or destroyed. That was Orson, number 94. At the end of August 1977, a tropical depression formed and became the first named storm of that Atlantic hurricane season, Nita. And it went on to do something quite remarkable, become a Category 5, moving towards the southwest and making landfall in Mexico from the Gulf. A track that's quite unparalleled actually, certainly with that intensity at least. Its peak wind speed was 175 miles an hour and its pressure was rather high actually, 926 millibars. That made just the one landfall, of course, caused $1 million in damage. Adjusted for inflation, that's $4 million, but did result in 11 fatalities. This is what Cesar thought of it, our team member.
Yes, Anita, effects of Anita in Monterey were minimal,
yeah.
But man, it was a very large cyclone and made some destruction, but not...
Well, not sure about large, but really intense. It made landfall very, very strong. One of the strongest storms on approach to landfall there.
Yes, that actually was very unexpected that Anita made landfall as a Category 5 hurricane.
Yeah, and a pretty weird track as well, southwest in the Gulf of Mexico. You don't see that very often, but it sometimes happens, as is the case here. Now we move on to May 2004 in the Western Pacific and Super Typhoon Nita, which passed just along the coast of the Philippines, didn't actually make a landfall but came remarkably close as a Category 5 storm. Affected the whole eastern side of the Philippines really, and then moved towards the northeast, getting very close to the small Daito island of Japan, and then skirting through the rest of the offshore islands as a tropical storm, before turning post-tropical shortly afterwards. Well, here's its top A wind speed 160 miles an hour and a pressure a rather high 935 millibars. Now when I say high, it still is a very strong system indeed.
Just the eye wall of the typhoon made landfall in the Philippines, but
right. So just the eye wall, but
Yeah.
still that's still a ferocious part of the storm. Arguably, you could say it's worse than actually seeing the eye because you've got eye wall without that relief in the centre.
exactly.
Question.
Yeah.
Did Typhoon Nita, Nita, have another name when it
Yes, it's
crossed the Philippines?
Yeah, its Philippine name was Dindo. Daniel, what do you think about that name?
Strange.
Very weird.
Dindo.
Replace one letter. Now for our next storm, the 1932 Bahamas Hurricane, which no one really remembers. The fourth hurricane of the season, it did become a Category 5 eventually, but started off as a tropical storm and then a hurricane as it passed the Turks and Caicos Islands and really started to intensify near the Bahamas, where it became an elusive Cat 5 and then moved towards the north, very close to Eleuthera Island there actually, and then moving off towards the northeast, beyond Bermuda quite easily, and in fact closer to the United States, but didn't actually make landfall there or indeed anywhere else before it turned post-tropical and then sailed towards the northeast. Well out of harm's way in the open Atlantic there. Actually, nearly it did reach Iceland as an extratropical storm. A rather intense storm, it reached an air pressure of 921 millibars, just to 160 miles an hour, but I think that's enough, don't you? It did make one landfall, that was in the Bahamas. Wind speed of 160 miles an hour at the time. Damage adjusted for inflation, $50 million in today's money. 16 fatalities, 1,000 buildings damaged, and 4,000 evacuees. Bubbling over my words as usual.
Cyclone Monica will be known as the only storm since reliable records began to make landfall along the Australian coast, or any Australian coast, as a Category 5 cyclone on the Saffir-Simpson Hurricane Wind Scale.
Monica then went on to make landfall in Australia's top end at Category 5 intensity, remarkable intensity, and then sped towards Darwin, passing just south of there as a tropical depression. Weakened rather quickly though, despite its strength. It reached a massive 180 miles an hour and at least a pressure of 916 millibars. Devon will explain more in a minute. 3 landfalls in the end. 175 miles an hour was the strongest one. Only $5 million of damages because of the sporadic populations in the area. $6 million adjusted for inflation. And 113 buildings were damaged. One of those was destroyed.
It's probably not the strongest cyclone of all time to make landfall, as there was a very severe cyclone in 1899 that hit Queensland and had storm surges of over 40 feet. However, Cyclone Monica has also been disputed to potentially be one of the deepest cyclones in the world of all time, as CIMIS and JTWC both put the storm well underneath 880 millibars, with CIMIS going the full 9 yards and putting the storm at 868 at T8.0.
The lowest pressures, say for instance, Lockhart River had 986 hectopascals, but when it was over the Northern Territory near Cape Westall, it got up down to 970.
Okay.
So it's not. It started weakening when it approached Cape Westall, which is that little little island that sticks out from Northern Territory.
Only 970 though. I guess that.
Yeah.
I suppose that, Devon, would you expect that the pressure gradient would have been very steep near the centre of that storm?
Extremely steep, as with any type of very small storm. You take a look at any small but intense storm out there, you take a look at storms like Hyann, Wilma, Andrew, Camille, The 35 Labor Day hurricane, and all of them have very, very, very steep pressure gradients with very, very intense winds.
At number 89 is Typhoon Joan, that formed in the Western Pacific in August 1959 and went on to become a Category 5 storm, as many storms do in this area in the Philippine Sea. Went on to hit Taiwan at peak intensity, well, very nearly peak intensity, certainly a Cat 5. Another strong landfall on China as well. Joan reached a staggering reported 195 miles per hour. Remarkable. And a pressure to match as well, 885 millibars. A very strong storm indeed. 2 landfalls, the strongest one coming first, 185 miles an hour. Imagine being in that. $5 million of damages adjusted for inflation today, that's 41 million. 14 fatalities in the end, and 3,308 buildings damaged or destroyed. For number 88, we go back into the depths of time to the San Francisco de Borja hurricane, which formed in the Central Caribbean and became a Category 5. But on the way to becoming a Cat 5, it passed very close to the Cayman Islands as a Cat 4, intensifying at that rate too. This is way back in 1846, by the way. Landfall just south of Havana, crossed through Havana, and then moved into Florida as a significant hurricane, and as you can see, skirting all the way up the eastern seaboard. A very remarkable storm indeed. This unnamed storm, there's only one picture of it, and that's it there, with people have got umbrellas up in the air and all that. Did they have umbrellas back then? And ships blowing over it. It's a terrible scene. The facts from this storm, well, it made 4 landfalls in the end. It caused $0.34 million of damages back then, which was a lot, but back in 1846, 10 million today. 164 people did lose their lives, and over 2,300 buildings were damaged or destroyed. Still well in the depths of history, at number 87 is the Cuba Hurricane of 1924. After first doing a loop in the western part of the Caribbean, a very interesting feature from this storm, intensifying all the way through that loop, I have you know. It then moved towards the north as a major hurricane and clipped the western coast of Cuba as a Cat 5, before weakening and then slamming Florida. Well, not so much a slam as it could have been, because it weakened a lot just before it did so, and brushing the northernmost Bahamas as a tropical storm. This storm was very strong indeed, as I keep finding myself saying with all of these Cat 5 storms. Of course they're bound to be strong. 165 miles an hour on this one, 910 millibars, very low for an Atlantic cyclone. 3 landfalls, the strongest one being at its peak intensity, 165 miles an hour. Only $30,000 of damages apparently at the time. Adjusted for inflation, that's $420,000 and 90 fatalities resulting from Hurricane 10 of 1924. At 86 is the last Category 5 that formed in the West Pacific in the record-breaking 1997 season. It was Paca, which formed initially in the central part of the Pacific and then crossed the international date line as a tropical storm. Slow to intensify at first, but as it approached the Mariana Islands, and indeed just about past the Mariana Islands, then it started to really ramp up that intensification, becoming a Category 1 just past Majuro, and then becoming a Category 3 storm, and not much later than that. And then it was plain sailing from there on in for Paca, apart from a little bit of weakening early on, but then it strengthened again to Cat 4, then to Cat 5, and set course for the southern Mariana Islands, passing over or just north of Guam as a Category 4, becoming a Cat 5 again after leaving Guam, and then gradually weakening, and towards the end it became a very sudden weakening trend that happened to Paca. It just sort of fizzled out. But of course the damage had already been done by that point, and this is what it looked like. So Paca, whilst not the most intense storm in the world by some distance, was still a rather strong one with winds of 185 miles per hour. Very strong indeed, you wouldn't want that in Guam. No landfalls ultimately, though it was very close, though damages were $580 million at the time, $855 million adjusted for inflation, and 11,000 buildings were damaged or destroyed. Devon, can you explain how all these really strong storms could have formed in 1997 in the West Bank?
El Nino.
Ah, yes, indeed. I mean, it's sort of happened a little bit in 2015, but not as much as in '97. Can we explain why, or is it?
One thing I do know about late 1997, early 1998 is that the upper atmosphere over the Pacific Ocean, northern and southern hemispheres, was actually a little bit below average, and if you lower the upper atmosphere's temperature, it's basically doing the same thing as ramping up the sea surface temperatures. So even though sea surface temperatures were declining in late 1997, obviously heading towards a record El Nino, but that's really besides the point, because the air aloft was cold enough, it still caused enough evaporation for all these storms to become Category 4s and Category 5s. I mean, this year is heading towards there. I mean, we've got potentially another 2 typhoons that may become a Category 5, though I highly doubt either of them will.
Do you think we'll get a December Cat 5?
I highly doubt that, too.
Michael, hello.
You alright?
Tell us about what happened with Typhoon Malor.
Well, Typhoon Malor was an interesting storm. Actually, I believe it was an annular typhoon from the looks of it. It formed as a tropical depression, intensified to a tropical storm pretty quickly. As soon as becoming a Category 1 typhoon, only 12 hours later became a Category 4.
Crazy.
And winds of 175 miles an hour. Air pressure was slightly higher in Malor. Air pressure is 910 millibars. It overall, even though it was Cat 5, wasn't overall that bad really. With only 3 fatalities and 1.5 billion damage.
Only? Not bad compared to some storms, albeit.
Well, yeah,
it did make landfall as a Category 1 with winds of 80 miles an hour. Where was that?
That was in Japan, mainland.
Right. Is that where all the damage was?
I believe so. Although there was a little... I believe it hit the Mariana Islands as Category 1, possibly.
At one point the Philippines were concerned, weren't they? I'm sure I remember that.
Yeah, they were. They were.
They'd already dealt with Ketsana and Palmer, hadn't they? Or maybe Ketsana was later on, I can't remember myself, but they had a bad year, didn't they, that year?
Yeah, I think Ketsana might have come a little bit later. Though... No, it came before, actually. Yeah. Because it went Ketsana, then it was 18W, then it was Palmer, then Malor.
Crazy. Well, they dodged a bullet with that last one, but they didn't have a good year overall. Tell us about what happened with Typhoon Forest then. Much more, almost an ancient storm in terms of where we are today.
Yeah, well, Typhoon Forest was a 1983 Category 5. Formed on September 19th, 1983, dissipated on October 4th. So it had winds of 75 miles an hour, but considerably low air pressure of 885 millibars. They did find out 21 direct fatalities and 17 were reported missing. Though overall, I don't believe there was any damage reported from Forest.
It was unknown.
Yeah, it only made landfall in mainland Japan as a Category 1.
Forest actually did cause 46. It caused the damage to 46,000 buildings. It was a very bad storm for Japan, not the worst by any stretch, but certainly one that caused a lot of damage and misery for people. Did make landfall as a weak typhoon with winds of 75 miles per hour, didn't it?
Yeah.
But tell us about what really makes Forest stand out from all the other storms, which was its really quick intensification, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, yes, both Malor and Forest were both two storms intensified very quickly, because within, I think it was only about 48 hours of forming as a tropical depression, it became a Category 5 within 24 to 48 hours.
Remarkable. At number 83 is Typhoon Ivan, which teamed up with Typhoon Joan, which happened at the same time on a menacing rampage in the Western Pacific. Both of them did in October 1997. Both reached Cat 5s, the strongest Category 5 pair ever recorded at the same time. But Ivan was just one of that two, and it was the worst one arguably for land areas, reaching Category 5 intensity on approach to the Philippines, and then actually made landfall there as a Category 4 storm with winds of 140 miles an hour apparently. It then moved towards the north and then towards the northeast, moving back out to sea as a tropical storm or Category 1 typhoon, sort of fluctuating between the two to be honest, and then headed slowly towards the Japanese islands, but didn't really do much on those islands ultimately. So the typhoon itself, at peak intensity, it reached 185 mile per hour winds and a pressure down to 905 millibars, another strong one. Just the one landfall, as I said, 140 miles an hour, $10 million of damages. Just for inflation today, that's 14 million, 16 fatalities in the end, and 15,000 buildings were damaged or destroyed, with 1,000 people apparently evacuating. But evacuation figures are sometimes a little bit sketchy, so it could have been more. Here's the progression of the storm on satellite imagery.
Very much like Cyclone Monica, Hurricane Kenna is the strongest storm to make landfall in the eastern Pacific Basin since naming began. There was one storm, which will be featured later on this list, that was stronger.
Before its 140 mile an hour landfall in Mexico, its peak wind speed was 165 with a pressure of 913 millibars. It did make landfall at 140 miles an hour Category 4. It did cause $101 million of damages today, that's 133. 4 fatalities, which could have been much worse, and 7,000 buildings destroyed by the storm.
One thing that pops out about me in Kenna is when I was browsing through videos looking for stuff on Kenna, I always came across this one video of a storm chaser that decided to put himself in the path of the storm, right in the 150 mile an hour winds that it produced. And he was hiding underneath this balcony while he was watching cars being pushed down the street and whatnot. And then all of a sudden, the balcony directly in front of him just completely collapsed. He ended up being spared, and his camera ended up being spared. But collapsing an entire brick balcony and roof is a testament to the storm's intensity.
The final storm we're going to talk about this evening is Hurricane Edith, which formed in the Atlantic in 1971. Not everyone remembers it, but it is a very notable storm, particularly if you live in Nicaragua or Honduras in particular. Honduras, where was it? I think it was on the border actually, where it made a Category 5 landfall after a period of intensification. Would you have called it rapid? Yeah. Yeah, and weakened rapidly as well after that.
And went on
very fast.
Went on to make one landfall in Belize and then another landfall in Mexico, and then ended up shooting back up the Gulf of Mexico, making landfall in Louisiana as a Category 2.
A remarkable track. Have you seen anything like that?
Gilbert.
Ah, Gilbert, I see. Caesar?
Yes?
What do you think about Edith? Another one that tracked fairly far south actually to begin with. A tropical storm right off the coast of Venezuela.
The only other Cat 5 that I know was that far south was.
Actually, I'm surprised. I don't know what to comment.
Yeah.
I think Felix is the only Category 5 that's made landfall further south than Edith in the Atlantic.
Ah, yes. As a Cat 5.
And
Yeah, that's what I
Nicaragua.
said, as a Cat 5.
That's right. It did cause 37 fatalities, $25.4 million back then. It was a lot of money. I'm not sure. Oh, actually, I can tell you how much that translates to in today's money. That's around $148 million today.
That might not be counting population here, but I'm looking on this list and I don't see Edith in the top 30. So, fortunately, I can't give you inflation, population, and wealth normalization.
I see.
Really, despite of a lot of landfalling, it only killed 37 people.
And did you also know that Edith caused a rather significant tornado outbreak in Louisiana when it made its final landfall, and caused a lot of flooding there as well. Apparently one of the tornadoes was an F3, damaged several homes and injured multiple people near Baton Rouge.
Wow.
That also lasted into Florida as well, as many storms do. I wonder whether anyone here could explain the relationship between a hurricane landfall and tornadoes that they spawn.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, go ahead, Devon.
Typically, when you have a hurricane landfall, you have a lot of friction in between the land and the hurricane as opposed to the sea. And what that friction can do is it creates a force that opposes the winds of the hurricane. You get that rotation in the atmosphere and you can have tornadoes spawning. Typically the large and slow moving systems are more likely to spawn tornadoes. But that's just a rule of thumb. I really haven't looked into that, so I can't really confirm anything.